And our political commentators with us now, Tim Hurdle and Lianne Dalziel. Kia ora korua. Thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning.
Kia ora.
Tim was an advisor in previous national governments. He works in strategic communication and advisory. He's currently campaign director for Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown. Lianne Dalziel is a life member of the Labour Party, a former cabinet minister. She ran as an independent for Christchurch's mayoralty in 2013 and was the city's mayor for 3 terms. She writes a regular column for newsroom.co.nz. The old saying, would the last person out of New Zealand turn off the lights? It comes back from time to time when we have big migration outflows. There's certainly a significant one underway right now. What are you making of this, Lianne, as potentially a symbol of the economic and jobs stresses on this economy right now?
Yes, it isn't the first time that I've heard that phrase, with the last one out, turn off the lights, because it has been an expression that's been utilised from time to time when we get high migration outflows. And this is a significant moment, I think, because I think you can hear from my voice that I'm not 100% well either. But I think that this is timed really with the downturn in the economy and with the real difficulty that people are having finding jobs. The people actively seeking work has increased. We've got underemployment again, as well as unemployment. And so we've got all of these challenges. And for a lot of people, they're saying, look, I'm gonna find a lot more opportunity over the Tasman, and for some even further afield. And I guess there are some who sort of felt that they missed out on the OE that they would have got during the COVID years, and are taking the opportunity to leave.
Paul Spoonley's analysis of the outflow, though, is an interesting one. Yes, it's always going to be the Kiwi OE, but actually the UK visas are down, if anything. The big destination is Australia. Tim, a net loss of 30,000, the highest for 13 years last year. And the other thing that we're seeing, and Paul Spoonley pointing this out again, is it is not just the young, it's not just the early 20-somethings. It's people who've got, kids at school and pets. And I can tell you both of those anecdotally. You're noticing this older demographic, perhaps in their 30s and 40s, and in many ways in their getting into their prime, that we're losing. How big a worry is this for the government?
I think it is a real concern. The correlation between net migration outflows and the relative economic performance of Australia and New Zealand is very clear. So what happens is when Australia is growing strongly or relatively stronger than New Zealand, we tend to lose a lot of people there, and that tends to pull back when New Zealand is equal or doing better. But at the moment, we've been in recession for quite a while. I think that is a real concern. Your second point there, though, about we are losing what I would call the sort of experienced but with career ahead of them, and so it's sort of experienced nurses or police that are actively being targeted by Australian states, and we're losing those people, and they're very important when it comes to training people coming through. And also I think there's a wider issue about the war on talent around the world. Everyone's wanting it, everyone's fighting for it now, and we have a global world. And I guess the third factor that we're seeing is the Albanese government made it a lot easier for New Zealanders to become Australian citizens. So I guess people are seeing potential for a stronger future actually living over there and actually becoming a citizen, where that was pretty much locked off for the last 25 years.
A big driver, Lianne, likely is that job insecurity, and it's not just the headline unemployment rate, which sits a tad over 5% at the moment. It's the underemployment, 30,000 more on the part-time jobs roll in just a couple of years, and many of them are not getting as much work as they want or need. And that, over time grinds gears, doesn't it? That leads you hear anecdotally about hundreds of job applications for potentially for one job, and that just causes people to reevaluate, what's on offer here, and it cannot be a good news story for the incumbent.
No, and we say anecdotally because we don't have the data that sits in behind it. But I would actually suggest that it would be a very good piece of research to ask for, which is what are the numbers of people applying for jobs? Because certainly I can add to your anecdotal list of people I know who have told me that they have been told by their employment agent or whatever who's trying to help them get into a job that there were over 150 applicants for the one job that they applied for, that they felt that they were slightly overqualified for. So people are going for jobs that they're overqualified for because there just isn't the work, and also the numbers of people applying. So the cuts in the public service have been significant in terms of increasing a vast number of people who are looking for employment at the same time, who've got qualifications and experience. And that makes it very difficult for those that are just coming out of university, for example. Acknowledging your point about the older ones who are in the market as well. But when they're in the market, the younger ones are missing out too, because there have been cuts to graduate training programs, for example, graduate internships within public sector organisations.
I'm interested in your take on this, Tim. We heard it from the building industry. We were discussing another matter this morning because it goes through its boom-bust cycle. And the old counter-cyclical, when the private sector is really struggling, the government can prime the pump. This government has doubled down on wanting to get its books back in order. It has gone after those public sector headcounts, and whichever version of numbers you use, whether it's unfilled jobs being counted or unfilled vacancies not being counted, it is pushing on, despite the fact that this economy remains essentially flatlining. Now, does it have a policy choice on this or not, in your view?
I think they've got a couple of things coming into their favour. When they came into government, they did pull back on some of the previous government's construction projects. You saw the prime example being the Dunedin Hospital build got delayed, but these things are now starting to kick in. Some of the roading projects, the funding is now starting to turn that into real projects. So there is that government build. The inflationary pressures are now backed off, so that is seeing the opportunity for people to crank up their economy. And I guess the third thing is we're seeing things like investment boost and some of the returns on dairy. In the dairy industry, some of the commodity returns in our primary industries are starting to push money into the economy. So there is going to be a general uplift in the economy, which I think that always takes a while to flow through to jobs and employment.
Well, manufacturing, the latest numbers out, it's still contracting using that above or below 50 measure. And, we're having these little kind of bursts of promise, manufacturing earlier in the year. Services sector's a big one, that'll be next. It's one of the slowest grinds out of recession that I can recall, and the question for National again is whether its timing is going to be lucky or unlucky.
Yeah, I've still got, we're probably still 12 to 18 months off an election, and I think that manufacturing number is always a very volatile series, but some of the underpinning things like UK registrations and the returns on dairy industry, those are pretty solid numbers that are really pointing to the right direction. And I guess the thing is we've got, if anything, concerns that the interest rates won't drop any further, but that's a sign of economic strength, really, in the economy.
All right, okay. That one is to play out and undoubtedly will be the backdrop against which that election is fought, and certainly the narratives around it. A big one to drop in the last day or two of last week, the reference group on climate adaptation. Now, this was, I think, Ministry for the Environment commissioned this, and it's come out with some pretty strong signals of a major change in approach if adopted by the government, and certainly the Prime Minister this morning wasn't dismissing it, if anything, was endorsing the general thrust. After 20 years, Lianne, no more government buyouts. There should be a beneficiary pays approach to new climate infrastructure. Councils should be able to start withdrawing services from impacted areas, for example. A big shift away from this idea that there would be managed retreat, more to, make good decisions and you're on your own. Now, how significant is this likely going to be in affecting government policy, which is legislation, which is due before the end of the year?
There's a side of me that wants to say that looking at a report like this, you kind of go, now that I have your undivided attention, can we talk about these issues? Because these issues have been on the agenda for a very long time, and the reality is the who pays and how is it paid for has never been properly dealt with. I remember when I became the mayor of Christchurch, and we were dealing with the aftermath, really, of the red zoning decisions, and then additional decisions that had to be taken about other areas which were susceptible to risk. We wanted to get the government to use its national policy statement provisions under the Resource Management Act to actually say, look, these are the sea level rise issues. These are what you have to actually put in your plan. This is what you have to arrange for. But they didn't do that. They've left it to each individual council to make their own plans as they go. Now, this is where this climate adaptation legislation that we have been waiting for and waiting for and waiting for, that is where it's got to take us to, is to have an agreed understanding of what risks particular areas will face into the future and a proper way for managing how we approach that. So if it's got no development on it, it's very easy. We just say you don't develop there. But if there is already development there, people's homes, people's neighbourhoods, how do we then walk away from that or walk back from that in order to create future security? And that has to be done over time, and it has to be done gently. And I guess that this report has thrown it onto the table. This is what happens if we don't address it.
20 years is not very long when it comes to ownership, not only of one home, but of entire suburbs, Tim. And Lianne made the point that it just doesn't seem to have been registering with people. No matter how much the insurers say we're getting out and government needs to hurry up and come up with a plan. How much risk, though, if the incumbent government goes too hard and the penny really does drop, that there may be suburbs that, become uninsurable and there's no bailouts in as soon as 20 years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. These managed retreat issues have been floating around for some decades. It's got more and more stark as we've had events like we had with the Auckland floods, that the scale of urban development on flood zones is probably well ahead of what it ever should have been. And these flood risks are right across the country. So I guess the long-term situation, though, is how do you manage this? Because it's very, very expensive. Homes are people's major assets. It's the centrepiece of generally their entire balance sheet. So for people to lose any equity or value in their house will be very, very damaging. So how we deal with in a sensitive way will take a bipartisan approach, because we have to create certainty that people know what's going to happen, but we're also going to have to work out how the people that are going to be quite severely affected by some of those decisions are compensated or dealt with, or able to find their way into a situation that means that they're not just completely ruined. So these issues are going to play out for some decades, but nobody's going to be in a hurry to try and close this, because the choices that any government will have to make are quite considerable, quite expensive, and quite painful.
So what is that adaptation bill going to look like at the end of the year? Are you going to have to be able to drive a bus through it? Is that what you're saying? Because if you start indicating that in 20 years' time there are no buyouts, that really does begin to affect the values of properties potentially in any number of parts of New Zealand from much sooner than that.
Well, I don't think any government can bind a future government of 20 years in that respect. But I guess what you're trying to do is create some certainty around how you'll be judging a property in the future, that has how we're alerting people to those risks, how the banks and insurers are treating those risks, If someone chooses to live there, will the insurers step in to cover that risk? Because at the moment we've sheeted home a lot of risk onto the taxpayer. But if it's a known risk and the person chooses to live there, this is probably what this 20-year thing is more about. It's about saying, well, you knew the risks, you decided to stay there, and in fact you decided to build. Therefore, it is your that is your choice.
It's not so much the new builds; it's the existing properties
And
that are going to become the question.
And
entire suburbs.
Who was responsible for letting it be built? But the other question is how do you find things like it? And you talk about adaptation. So some of these houses, whether they can be lifted up out of the floodplain or certainly above the datum. These are some of the things that we've seen, and I guess that's where we're trying to get people to think about the future and the sustainability of living on that land, given the flood risks are probably increasing.
What's bending local government out of shape still, Lianne, is that they still cannot stop these new developments. Just talking to Auckland Council recently about a major development that, again, it cannot actually prevent happening now, despite its own flood maps. That seems to be the plea is for forthcoming RMA reform to deal to that, but it may also put question marks around a lot of proposed greenfields development at the moment.
Well, I was going to make the point that I don't know why these three separate areas of work were cut up. One into adaptation, one into resource management, they're all connected. They're all part of the same picture. And I do get a little bit frustrated by all of this because we had an experience down in Christchurch where essentially you could describe the red zoning as a form of unmanaged retreat, but it provided a mechanism for paying a certain amount of money to a certain group of people. It was 6,000 homes, I think, on the flatland. I think you'd remember that, Tim, as well. But that, I mean, it had its shortcomings, but it has also created an expectation that the government will step in. The trouble is that there were areas that should not have been built on in the first place before the earthquakes happened because the areas were susceptible to liquefaction and lateral spread. And some of the developments around the Bexley area where I lived, the more modern developments, they were certainly in that category. They should never have been built. I've gone back and looked at the decisions that were made about why the development went ahead, and there was virtually no consideration around the liquefaction risk. And so we didn't have a good understanding of risk. What I'm saying now is that we actually do know what those risks are. We do know what they are in different parts of the country. I just don't think that we've had a very good public-facing conversation actually explaining what those risks are, what can be done to mitigate against the risks, what can be done to avoid the risks, and what can be done to transfer risk, which is what the insurance element is. And if the insurance isn't there to receive the transfer, then that's when somebody else is going to be asked to pay. And those are the conversations that we need to have as a country.
Okay. Let's have a look at the latest poll that landed. Just one, of course, the Courier poll. Interesting poll, though. It had New Zealand First slightly ahead of both ACT and the Greens, I think, jumping into third place, and also gave the current coalition a relatively comfortable cushion in terms of seats. Not sure if it's the start of a trend or an outlier or, what you take out of it, but interesting to see those three smaller parties still very strong in their own right at this stage of an electoral cycle, Tim.
Yeah, and that's unusual under our system, that we've tended to have a situation where the major parties almost blocked out the sun on the smaller parties, but in this circumstance we have had a real attempt at being a coalition government. That was the language right from the start. And I guess Winston Peters has had a very high profile, and both ACT and New Zealand First have been very good at owning some issues and some niches and creating points of difference between themselves and the government. That hasn't traditionally been the style. Traditionally, we've seen governments basically push the minor party into a corner. So that is keeping the profile up. And I guess it's also a reflection that National has really staked its stall on on the recovery of the economy. Economy's still weak, and they've said, we'll get the economy back on track. So that they're very reliant on the economy picking up to see their poll numbers recover from where they are, because they're now quite significantly below where they were at the election.
In all your time in politics, Lianne, we've not seen, not from the very, very earliest iterations, a polling cycle like this with minor parties, all of the minor parties actually, polling so strongly at this stage of things. They normally worry about falling under the 5% threshold, and particularly those that are tied up with the government.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, to be honest, it kind of looks to me like Winston Peters has played this brilliantly with his taking of the deputy role first, and now transitioning very clearly into an electoral, campaign mode. And it's not surprising, because when he has been in that senior role going into the election, it seems to have worked against him and the party.
Interesting for ACT, its leader David Seymour is now in this role of both being Deputy Prime Minister, and as my colleague Craig McCulloch has written in his wrap on ACT's annual rally at the weekend, going into campaign mode as well. And he's kind of stayed that way the whole way through, Tim. He's done as much rattling of the cage as the opposition has sometimes.
Well, I wonder too if this is somewhat a reflection to the current mediascape, where traditionally governments were speaking through the TVNZ one bulletin at night and the morning report in the morning, and they had control of voice. But now we have a very disaggregated media environment, and the ACT Party and the New Zealand First Party can use social media and online media to narrowcast at their niche, and keep the people that are interested in them. The algorithms of those social medias are directing attention towards the people that will be interested in that. And I wonder if that's partly it. It's easier to maintain an interest if you're an ACT Party supporter and following David Seymour than it might have been in 20, 30 years ago, when the media was probably more curated.
It's an interesting point, and they're very good at their social media, both in their own ways, actually. They've run an almost continuous kind of feed in some way, so they're able to keep their base very interested and keep themselves front and centre. Te Pāti Māori, another very good user of social media, and it's interesting. Now we've got a by-election, not yet announced, but coming. Green's not going to run, but Labour has confirmed Pini Henare will challenge. The Te Pāti Māori, Orini Kaipara, has been announced as their candidate. She's got some wider public status as a broadcaster, and also very strong roots in her own community. What do you think of the race, Lianne? Will it turn out pretty close one way or t'other?
Well, I think they're both very strong candidates. I know Penny Henare from my time in Parliament, and he represented the seat until he lost it at the last election by a very small margin. And I guess and both candidates are very respectful of the circumstances that have brought them to this particular electoral race. And so I think that we're going to see quite a respectful debate on policy issues. And I think that will be a really good thing for New Zealanders to be able to observe as a way to conduct an election campaign. So I think they could send a pretty powerful message in how they conduct themselves.
Tim?
Oh, I think it's going to be a very difficult. I was looking at the logistics of that electorate. You've got you normally have low turnout in Maori electorates anyway, but the by-elections have even lower turnout. But the votes are spread from everywhere, from Piha to Botany, from the Harbour Bridge to South Auckland, and most of the people that you will meet on the street are not potential voters. They're only a sprinkling right across that entire space, that massive urban space. So actually finding the voters becomes very difficult. So campaigning will be even more difficult. And then we're going to have a local body election over the top of that. So I think they're going to have you probably are going to see a bit of focus on social media and on sort of debate kind of discussions as a way of trying to connect with the voters, because actually finding them and literally knocking on their door is actually quite difficult.
Really appreciate your time, both of you. Thank you. That's Tim Hurdle and Lianne Dalziel.